webcast today. I'm Karin Nauth-Shelley, Vice President of Global Marketing at Belatrix Software. Thanks so much for joining us. For those of you who are new to Belatrix, Belatrix Software helps companies create smart software. Today's webcast kicks off our new Belatrix Software Innovation University. It's an effort to bring together smart people, thought leaders, and technical experts, as well as business executives like you, to collectively challenge our thinking on how to better innovate. And hopefully, to share practical insights of how to do all of that. The goal is really to get your neurons firing, to get your creative and technical juices flowing for what's next, and hopefully also to help you reimagine new products, new services, all enabled by technology. You're going to hear today about design thinking. And this is an approach that Belatrix is embracing to really multiply the value of Agile software development. And we're really excited to share this with you and look forward to having further discussions on what this means within your organization. Before we get started, a couple of quick notes. We'll follow up with you on how to access the recorded session from today. You'll be receiving that immediately after the call. And also, we want to encourage you to submit your questions using the chat feature, and you can do that at any point during the session. You don't have to wait for the Q&A session. I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today. Simone Ahuja is author, filmmaker, management consultant, and advisor. Simone's professional expertise, and indeed her very passion, is for what triggers invention. She travels extensively around the world looking for what individuals and firms are doing to achieve that. Simone has been highly instrumental in helping major corporations around the world rethink their assumptions and their overall approach to R&D. She'll share some of those stories in her presentation today. We're exceptionally honored to have Simone with us to kick off this Belatrix Software Innovation University. Over to you, Simone.
Thank you, Karin. That's a lovely introduction. I appreciate that. Good afternoon, everyone. As Karin mentioned, I'm Simone Ahuja. I'm the founder of Blood Orange. We're a marketing and strategy consultancy focusing primarily on innovation and often coupling that with innovation for emerging markets. I'm also the co-author of a business book called Jugaad Innovation. Before we start our discussion of design thinking today, I'd really like to thank Belatrix Software for asking me to lead this webinar, and especially for being open to topics like this one that are so critical to innovation and problem solving in a really complex economic environment. I'd also like to thank longtime CIO Art Godfrey and Patrick Miller, CTO of Chatham Financial, and his team members, Ahuja, Matt, and Brett, who are really generous in sharing their time and ideas as well as their challenges to innovation so that we could better design this webinar for all of you. A bit about me and my work. Over the last several years, I've been studying innovation, and in particular value innovation, also known as frugal innovation or Jugaad innovation. And this is a low-cost, flexible, and inclusive approach to innovation that supports the creation of higher value, lower cost products, services, and business models. Now, as I continued studying innovation around the world, I learned that a lot of approaches to innovation have significant parallels. And I especially felt that Jugaad innovation is closely linked to design thinking as a problem-solving approach. So as a result, I continued to study design thinking as a problem-solving methodology and a tool for innovation. So today, I want to share an overview of what design thinking is and how it can help you fight complexity as well as accelerate product development cycles. Now, we all know that in business today we're facing increasing complexity and a volatile, highly interconnected economic environment, right? There's tremendous pressure for enterprises to create higher value, lower cost products and services that'll help drive sustainable growth. And this has to be done quickly to capture margin and to compete with fast-moving global competitors. So what is design thinking? Many of us have heard about it, but we don't know what it is specifically or why it's relevant to us. Tim Brown is the CEO of design innovation firm IDEO, which was largely responsible for bringing design thinking to the fore out of the realm of designers, and he defines it this way. He says design thinking can be described as a discipline that uses the designer's sensibility and methods to match people's needs with what is technologically feasible and what a viable business strategy can convert into customer value and market opportunity. So what he's saying here is that the meaning of the word designer is being expanded. So whether you're a CTO or a developer, each one of us in organizations today is becoming increasingly responsible for innovation and as a result for design. So design thinking is a repeatable creative problem-solving methodology with supporting tools that can make innovation more frequent, and I would also say we've observed it makes it more successful and less complex. So while design thinking emerged from the design disciplines, it's not just beneficial for problem solving in visual design. It's a clear methodology that actually can be applied during any stage of a product life cycle. And importantly, it can be used in tandem with other management methodologies like Jugaad innovation and Agile, as we'll discuss in a moment. Design thinking is an especially relevant approach to software product development because of its frequent iterations and course corrections, and because it's a process that really helps develop what users want by frequently evaluating the product. Now today, companies across sectors like Barclays, Amway, and IBM are integrating design thinking into their innovation approaches very deeply. IBM has even inaugurated a design thinking university where employees go through a 1 or 2 week design camp to initiate them to this really effective approach. And I'd like to encourage you to check it out. It's really explains well why they're doing this. This is at ibm.com/design. I want to show you a brief clip from 60 Minutes where Tim Brown of IDEO describes how the application of design thinking has changed radically in the last 10 years.
What we've seen over the last 10 years is the application of design to a broader and broader set of problems. And we've followed that. Perhaps helped make some of that happen. But we're seeing now that just thinking about a product, or just thinking about a piece of graphic design, or a poster or a book, or that just thinking about these individual things isn't enough anymore. We've got to start to connect design together and create experiences for people that are more seamless, that are connected together, that make sense. And so we're starting to see design applied to services. We're seeing design applied to systems level problems, things like healthcare and education.
Give me an example of the kinds of problems people are bringing to you that they didn't bring to you 10, 15 years ago.
Carlos Rodriguez-Pastor, who runs a wonderful company in Peru, who's trying to build the education system there, came and said, I think you guys can help us create a sustainable education system, private, but very low cost, $100 a month, where we need to look at the buildings, absolutely, but we need to design the curriculum. We need to design the tools that teachers use to share the best techniques for learning. We need to design the business model. How's this all going to work? How are we going to make it sustainable? Because it's got to make some money. That wouldn't have happened 10 years ago.
And now you're also working with the NFL Players Association.
Yeah, I think that's a great example. So often in the world of design, we might see a problem and it seems to be all about one moment, right? So one of the interesting things about the NFL is that players have an average career of only about 4 years. So they're going to spend most of their lives not being players. Because they've had from college and then in a professional league. And so the NFL Players Association really wants to help them make that transition out into the real world. But what you have to do when you look at something like that is say, well, is it really just about that moment, or is it more about a journey that these players are going on over time? And so that's what we're trying to do with them is help them understand how actually they have to start helping players maybe much earlier on.
And that represents, in a sense, an idea as well as the answer to a question.
Yeah, I mean, design is always about the combination of an idea and how you then express that idea in the world, the solution, if you like.
So Tim Brown talked about looking at problems more holistically, right? Looking at an ecosystem and really thinking closely about what the customer needs. Why do we want to do this? Well, in short, it's so we can more effectively solve problems and reduce failures. Statistics show that nearly 70% of IT projects across industries fail in some critical manner. And the worldwide economic impact is $3 billion, which is about 5% of global GDP. So clearly this is an issue that demands close attention. But unfortunately, most of us don't really take the time to learn from these failures and better understand what about our approach and toolkits really caused them. And to be clear, this lack of evaluation happens across sectors, not just in IT. Michael Krigsman, who's an expert of enterprise software, conducted an analysis of IT project failures, and he learned that design thinking can play an important role in improving enterprise software development and implementation. How? The design thinking approach offers a way to address underlying causes of project failures, according to Mr. Krigsman. He says these are poor communication, rigid thinking, propensity towards tunnel vision, and information silos. I couldn't agree more, and again, this happens across sectors. I would add other reasons for failure include a lack of clarity around goals by multiple stakeholders, a lack of a deep understanding of the marketplace, and I think one of the most pernicious of all is assumption. So in other words, assuming that we know more about the marketplace and the customers than we really do. But failure is inevitable, right? We're human, it's a part of who we are. And design thinking encourages fast failure. It takes into account that eventually we will fail, and we should. And I want to be sure to add that it's really important for organizations to socialize failure so that the expense of failure is flipped and becomes an investment in learning. So all of this goes back to taking the time to really understand why products fail so that success is more likely in the future. So what Krigsman essentially is saying, and what we've seen with work with our own clients, is that an analytic approach of product development alone doesn't work well. We certainly don't want to throw it out, but it's greatly enhanced when it's combined with a creative approach that focuses on customer needs as well as development. So what is design thinking? It encourages an inclusive multidisciplinary interaction to foster true creativity, and I think importantly really aligns participants around specific goals. So it's not random creativity, you are focusing on a specific goal. Important to know that it's also a mindset that applies to both analytical and creative thinking towards solving a problem. And it's really more about how you think as opposed to what you know. Our clients have found that it's really quite effective in problem solving, and it's especially relevant in today's world where demand for innovation, especially with constrained resources, is increasing rapidly. So today our intention is that you walk away from this webinar with two things. One is an understanding that this methodology is a tool that can help you drive innovation and growth within your organization, and the other is that how this methodology can be used to augment your current product development methodologies, including Agile. So why is design thinking relevant to you? Well, it can help you catalyze your approach to problem solving through a creative, repeatable, and iterative process, right? We talked about that it's also with multidisciplinary teams. And there are similarities with Agile, but I think it's important to note that design thinking, again, can enhance Agile methodologies to reduce complexity and increase success in product development cycles. I want to briefly walk you through some methodologies commonly used in enterprise software development, just so that everyone's on the same page moving forward. And these are waterfall, Agile, and of course design thinking, which is increasingly common in the space. There are certainly many others such as Lean, but we're just going to focus on these for the purpose of our discussion today. Waterfall, many of you remember, is a linear process of development where the completion of one phase leads to the next, right? And progress is seen as flowing steadily downwards, like a waterfall, through phases of conception, initiation, design construction, testing, implementation, and maintenance. And each phase has its own content and set of goals. However, there are some limitations here, right? Waterfall is a pretty rigid approach. Previous phases can't be overturned And that becomes a problem because clients may not know exactly what requirements they need before reviewing a working prototype and commenting on it. So therefore, they might change the requirements throughout the project. And this inability to easily change or iterate is really what I would think is Waterfall's major shortcoming. As many of you know, Agile is an iterative methodology. It leverages the power of cross-functional teams and taps into all stakeholders during development phases while calling for daily cooperation between these individuals or groups. It also encourages evolution and adaptation within a fixed time frame. So I think the greatest strength of Agile is that it encourages flexibility and a quick response to change, and that even welcomes change, even at a late stage in development, which is critical since, as I mentioned earlier, evolving prototypes will shape how clients respond, right? Agile certainly has its challenges too. In talking with others who use this methodology, I learned that a drawback of Agile is that it can feel regulated and perhaps even micromanaged. One of the greatest challenges of Agile was brought up by Alex Robio from Belatrix during a discussion that we had about the parallels and differences between Agile, design thinking, and other methodologies. And he made a really important observation, which is that Agile is so development focused that there's often a lack of emphasis on understanding the marketplace. The risk here is that even using Lean or Agile, we build a product, release it, and so, unfortunately, it often will fail. And I agree that this is based on or because of a lack of deep understanding of the marketplace, the consumer, and their unmet needs. And again, this is a phenomenon that occurs across sectors. So we always encourage our clients to move away from focusing so much on execution that they're answering a question that's based on assumptions rather than meeting the real needs of consumers. So to me, that's one of the most powerful elements of design thinking that I'd like to share with you today. It's the emphasis on understanding the consumer and the marketplace before you even think about moving forward to development. I found it interesting to learn about the parallels that exist between design thinking and Agile. They're both iterative and experimental. They call for frequent evaluations, including testing and customer feedback that occurs at the same time as development. There's a focus on failing fast and course correcting over time. There's a bias towards putting ideas into action. They're solution focused and they're collaborative with cross-functional teams. However, there are some key differences between design thinking and Agile as well. So while Agile is task-driven and focuses on a specific set of prescriptive processes, design thinking really encapsulates a set of guidelines, general principles, and a larger vision. And I think it's for this reason that the two approaches are highly complementary, even on the same project, or especially on the same project, because both of them use this iterative work cycle to pursue customer-centric goals. So how does this work? How do I do this? How do I integrate design thinking into my product development cycle? Well, one of the things that design thinking does, and it requires that no matter how obvious the solution may seem, many ideas and solutions are generated initially without any judgment. This allows us to be more free when we think of ideas, and it allows us to view a problem from more than one perspective. It creates an environment that's conducive to growth and experimentation. And an important piece, which we'll talk about more in a moment, is observation, ethnographic research, involving yourself in the process to learn what people really do as opposed to what they say they do or what you think they do. And it starts with a multidisciplinary team. This could be a team of designers, developers, QA, marketing, finance, and R&D. The more diverse, the better. And we see this all the time. The more diverse the team is, the better the ideas become. And it's important to bring these diverse perspectives together right from the start because it really generates these well-rounded solutions. We've seen with our clients that fostering this kind of an inclusiveness just lends itself to a higher level of creativity. So the suggestion by design thinking is that a better solution can be found when 5 people work on a problem for 1 day than 1 person working on a problem for 5 days. That's the power of the multidisciplinary team. Empathy is a foundational principle of design thinking. It's really about talking to users, observing them with what we call a fresh set of eyes, and removing all the assumptions that you have. It means that you go to where the customers are and you spend time with them. It's hard to solve a problem for a product by sitting at your desk. You've got to go to the field, to the customer, and understand their context. And by context, I mean everything that isn't software in this example. Your customers, your business strategy, your distribution, sales, competitors, regulatory compliance. And my recommendation for leadership is let developers talk to clients. Let them take responsibility for the outcome of the software they develop. Have them sit with the user while they're using some software, maybe even your software. It is very, very powerful. The value of empathy can't be overstated, and it's really not difficult to develop. You can ask your users to tell you their stories. And you know what? Customers love doing this. Developers, again, managers, QA, talk to your customers. It's really the best way to learn what they want, what their needs are, and also their pain points, right? So one especially powerful way to do this and to develop this empathy is actually let them teach you their job. That's how you really understand the customer. And it allows you to discover those unmet needs that lead to breakthrough products, right? It allows you to understand the emotions that guide their behavior. And importantly, I would say most importantly, it helps you understand whether you're solving the right problem. I mean, we work with companies across sectors, big companies primarily and some smaller companies, SMEs as well. And surprisingly, very often we start one of these design thinking labs or a value innovation lab, and we quickly realize actually we're not answering the right question. We're not really meeting the need of the consumer in the first place in the original path that we had. Defining the problem is the next critical step in design thinking. It sounds obvious, but a clear definition of the correct problem will invariably help all stakeholders stay focused and reduce product failure. So at all times, the team stays focused on the problem you're trying to solve and remembers that it's all about the users. So one way we do this is by asking ourselves, how might we solve problem X, while kind of reflecting back on the empathy that we build through the stories that our customers told us and the observations from our field research. So the ideas we generate are specific to the problem that you defined earlier, giving tremendous clarity, right, helping shape the problem solving. And we dedicate time to allow everyone to come up with ideas. And of course, there has to be a finite amount of time. And this really helps us get to that elusive breakthrough innovation that really has to be a part of every company's innovation portfolio. Here's some guidelines for ideation, very similar to brainstorming. You build on the ideas of others, so you never say no, that won't work. You say yes and, which I actually find is very effective for personal relationships as well. You defer judgment. In the ideation phase, there are no good or bad labels. You go for quantity. This is what we call a divergent process. We're going for numbers here so that there are no bad ideas, and you'll have a chance later in the process to converge and distill down and be more selective. Staying focused on the topic and the problem that was defined is a key part of the ideation process. Thinking about the ideas with the user in mind, and one conversation at a time. Again, try this at home. It's good stuff. And importantly, encourage wild ideas. We do see that in a company, typically there's a little bit of issue with bringing out the really wild ideas with your coworkers at first, but once it's unleashed, it's really powerful, and that's where the breakthroughs really start to come from. So this is what our labs start to look like through the ideation process. After a fixed period of divergent ideation, we start to refine and validate by grouping ideas into themes with the group, ultimately deciding collectively which ideas are the ones that they want to develop further. The next step after you ideate, diverge, and then converge, landing on the ideas you want to continue with, prototyping is the next step, and it allows us to make the ideas in our head more tangible. It's really quite important because actually it changes the way we think about and communicate about our ideas. And prototypes are simply quick, low-res representations of a product, service, or even a business model. It gets us out of our heads and into our hands, similar to what's done in a hackathon. We put it out there. And then we iterate, which isn't repeating the process as in refactoring, it's building on what we learn. And this iteration, quickly improving on low-res prototypes based on feedback. So the tangibility that prototyping brings is so critical. So when we create these low-res 3D representations of our ideas, we use simple materials, very simple, like you had in school, like paper, tape, pipe cleaner, string, but it's an extremely powerful process, and it really does elevate the level of discussion about a potential solution. And when we prototype, we end up with a plan to build something, and importantly, that plan entails continued learning. It's not assumed that that's the end-all, be-all solution. We're going to continue to iterate and build new prototypes. Here are a couple of examples of prototypes developed in labs we've held with our clients. On the right is someone making a prototype of an actual product. And this tendency towards making a product is most common, especially in the first labs that we run with clients. On the left is one of my favorite examples of what prototyping can look like and why it's so important. This client was creating a product for emerging markets, and the engineer created a prototype that reflected the importance of giving status to the users of the product. Very interesting, right? Something that wasn't being addressed in their current approach. So he created a stick figure out of a person, or rather out of a pipe cleaner to look like a person, and he represented this increase in status and ultimately customer satisfaction by pulling on a string that literally elevated that little stick figure from low to high. It was fantastic, and ultimately led to the creation of a component in the product ecosystem that addressed the importance of status. Again, I don't think we would have gotten to that place in a traditional discussion. Especially, I don't think we would have gotten there as quickly as we did. Testing is the next step. It's a critical one in the process because it's the stage where we take our prototypes and we learn whether or not they're really valuable to the customer. We learn if they can be improved or if we need to gut and start over. That's a reality sometimes. Sometimes we test internally with our colleagues, and we even sometimes take low-res prototypes out to customers. One of our clients took a paper representation of a product to their current users, who ultimately looked at this very simple design and told them that they didn't know what most of the product features were used for. And again, it was important because the engineers didn't realize that a lot of these features were going unused. And this led to a change in product design, one that was more simple and ultimately much more cost-effective. So this is a feedback loop that helps ensure positive outcomes, and it's especially relevant to product development because the testing and validating of your ideas are what will help ensure success and reduce failures in your product development cycle. Thinking like a designer can really transform the way organizations develop products, services, and business models. Design thinking approach focuses on 3 core principles. The first is human centricity. So there's a focus on the human point of view, right? What their unmet needs are, what their desires are, based on a well-defined context. And it also refers to intuitiveness, which dictates how easily a product can be used and ultimately its success. The second principle is viability. Is it economically viable? In other words, can you execute it in a way that drives sustainability economically and potentially otherwise? And how do we leverage any constraints and still realize our vision? And the final one is feasibility. This is based on exploration and experimentation, which is built and tested at every stage. So at the center of these principles is this kind of sweet spot where innovation lies. It's really what we're all trying to get to, right? I wanted to be sure to mention doing more with less. I think it's something that all of us are facing today, right? Constrained resources, less time, make it faster, do it with less money. So doing more with less is something that design thinking really helps us with. Mostly because of the frequent iterations, less time is spent developing something that doesn't find value in the marketplace. So invariably resources like time and money are saved. Of course, that empathy piece is really useful as well in understanding what we should even begin to iterate. And the divergence in the ideation process creates so many potential solutions to one problem, it really increases the chances that the chosen problem rather solution will work. I just want to share a case study of design thinking with you that I think is a really powerful one. This is Jane Chen. She grew up in California and she attended Stanford for her MBA. And she went to their design school called the D School, also a big proponent of design thinking. And there she took a class called Entrepreneurial Design for Extreme Affordability. And in the class, their goal is to make products for 1% of the cost of traditional products, 1%. So not just affordable, but extremely affordable. So Jane and her classmates were charged with creating a low-cost incubator for Nepal, where infant mortality is really high due to hypothermia. And they did this in a very interesting way using the principles of design thinking, including empathy, including ideation, including prototyping. I'm going to show you a video where she talks a little bit more about the product and their process.
Embrace is a low-cost infant warmers intended to be used in these emerging market settings. And what makes it different from the products already out there, first, it doesn't require a constant supply of electricity. And in many of these rural settings, electricity is a huge problem, so you won't find traditional solutions in these areas. Secondly, it's portable. It's very intuitive to use. Mother or midwife could use it. You don't need a trained caregiver to use the product. And so for that reason, you can actually expand the reach of healthcare. We have a product in the field now that's used in a clinical setting, and we have a second one being launched this year that can be used directly in the home setting by these mothers. I think it's just keeping an open mind and being willing to listen to your customers and the people that you're ultimately trying to serve with the product, and also a lot of experimentation. I think failure is an important part of this, being able to just respond quickly to the feedback you're getting and experiment with a number of different things. So the sleeping bag itself has gone through so many different iterations. In the early days of this, for example, we had it such that you had a wax pouch the baby would lay directly on top of. But because of perception issues, doctors and mothers would always say, well, what if the wax punctures and then it gets on the baby's skin? Well, these are totally non-toxic food-grade products, so nothing would happen to the baby, but because of the perception issue, we actually created a separate pocket to put the wax pouch into so that you wouldn't have that fear. When you're trying to do something very different that no one else has done before, you have to be innovative throughout the business, so both in terms of the technology and how you deliver that technology. Traditional distribution models may not meet your needs. So for example, in India, you don't really have medical devices in rural areas because these companies don't serve that type of doctor. So how are we going to get to the doctor? So now Embrace is experimenting with both a medical device model as well as a pharmaceutical model. We're studying consumer goods models, and we're just constantly experimenting to see what's going to work.
So Jane and her colleagues really embraced the principles of empathy, iteration, and prototyping. And she told me that when they first started out, they were students. They didn't have a lot of resources to work with. So they started out by cutting up a sleeping bag that they got in a thrift store. And then, of course, they went on to create more advanced prototypes with other materials, including 3D printers, and they continued to iterate from there. Now, when they had a solid working model of Embrace, they took it to Nepal and they tested it in the marketplace. And they found that it was being well accepted and used, but that the mothers were keeping the temperature on the temperature gauge a few degrees lower than what was recommended. And they first couldn't figure out why that was, because really it's not going to prevent hypothermia that way. So when they went back into the field to talk to doctors, to talk to mothers, they learned that a lot of these mothers feel that Western medicine is too strong. So for example, if they have Western cough syrup and the recommended dose is 2 teaspoons, they might give their child half a teaspoon. So what they did is they went back and iterated. So they replaced that temperature gauge that would supposed to read 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius with something that just was okay, not okay. So it was a smiley face or a frown face. And what they found out is that it worked really well. And everyone wants to be okay, right? Everybody wanted to have that smiley face appear on their readout. And that is, I think, again, the power of iteration based on customer feedback. And the reason that Embrace is one of my favorite innovations that emerge from design thinking is because this very low-cost, inclusive innovation is actually better than a traditional product, because instead of putting your baby in a remote box like a traditional incubator, you could keep your baby warm and hold your baby, which is so important both for physiological and emotional development. So they address so many issues. Of course, you don't require electricity. The devices are either $80 or $200 instead of $20,000. And that, again, is the power of design thinking as a methodology. Here are some principles that really help with team productivity and are aligned with design thinking. The first is putting a cross-functional team in place to enhance the diversity of ideas, failing fast and failing early to ensure greater success later. And I want to just remind everyone it's so important to learn and socialize failures so that we can learn from them. Being both vision and task-driven, combining creativity and analysis. Making tangible prototypes so customers can give highly relevant feedback, and iterating often based on this feedback. And finally, embracing change and ambiguity. I'd like to share a quote by Lawson, who writes about architectural design, since it applies to the essence of what we discussed today. And he says that research and analysis make sense of the world as it is. Design imagines the world differently than it is today. So in sum, design thinking offers an alternative or a way to augment more rigid approaches to product development. It's an empathetic approach that focuses on asking the right questions by understanding the marketplace. It encourages iterations and early failure, which helps decrease complexity and increases project success by ensuring that we answer the right questions and really meet the needs, the unmet needs of our customers. Agile helps us build products efficiently, which is also critically important. So putting these two methodologies together can be extremely powerful and lead to more accelerated, successful product development cycles. I hope you enjoyed this brief overview of design thinking as a problem-solving methodology. This is the first in a series of courses that Belatrix will offer as a part of their Innovation University series, where topics ranging from value innovation to leadership will be discussed in the coming months. So be sure to look out for these and share your feedback of topics that you'd like to hear about. We've got a slide at the end of this deck that you'll have access to later where we've listed resources that may be of interest to you. And my email is on the bottom of the slide here. So please feel free to reach out to Belatrix with any questions or to me directly.
Great. Thank you so much, Simone. Let's open things up for some questions. I want to just remind everyone that the chat line is open, so please do feel free to submit your questions. I do actually have one that I'd like to have you answer, Simone. Mm-hmm. There's a question that's coming in. Do I need a design thinking expert to try this in my company?
That's a great question. I would say the answer is no, primarily, but it does help. So there are lots and lots of tools. If we look at Creative Commons and all these other things that are emerging today, a lot of ideas are being shared very openly. And companies like IDEO at IDEO.org, as well as Stanford's D School, they actually offer products, or rather products, toolkits online that you can actually download for free and use. So I actually think that rather than going to do the big pitch for design thinking in the company, if you feel it's going to be met with some resistance, learn a little bit more about it and run your own small lab. If it's well received, which usually it is after people go through it and understand why that approach is so different and why it's so powerful and valuable, then I think it does really help to bring in a facilitator who can take you to some deeper layers, just like IBM is doing with their design camps for every, well, for many of their employees. So I think it's a great democratic thing in that it's not hard. It just requires a shift in mindset, and it really requires, I think, a kind of humility and listening that comes with that humility, and enough confidence too to understand that listening like that and taking the time isn't going to set you back in any way. In fact, that it will advance you.
Great, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Simone, I think maybe we'll go with this other question, and it seems a little bit related. Can you talk a little bit about the kind of culture of organizations that are really attuned to embracing this kind of effort?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the most interesting things, and what I like about that question, is it really is cultural. Again, it's about culture and a mindset. A lot of times when I talk to business leaders today, they ask about, driving transformation across the enterprise. I hear this very often, and it can be done, but it also has its challenges. Similarly, when we want to integrate something like design thinking, sometimes it's easier to start with a small win. So we'll see an organization, let's say, that has multiple divisions and then, of course, multiple business groups within those divisions. And a business group will take it upon themselves to learn about this methodology. They'll run kind of an internal experiment, and they'll have some success with it, and then they'll kind of socialize that success. And then it starts to spread across the organization. So this is one of the ways that we see that design thinking is entering into spaces where it wasn't seen before. The other, of course, is through acquisition. So if there's an acquisition, let's say of a design firm, then this methodology starts to become more a part of the core culture of the company. But I think it's most important to note that we're seeing this across sectors. So healthcare, finance, IT. I can't think of one where it's not being used today.
Thank you. Another question. Can you share some examples of how this is being used from a product development approach? In terms of, I believe the question relates to software development.
Sure. I can speak about that more superficially, but what I'm understanding from my research is that design thinking is being used as a complement to methodologies like Agile. So just like we talked about earlier, when the development is so highly focused on that we lose sight of actually the problem that we're solving, then we start to find more failures in the marketplace. So what I'm seeing is that design thinking will be brought in more as an upfront methodology, which then gets incorporated a bit later into Agile. So for example, a company might start with a design thinking lab where they actually send developers into the field. They might sit with customers. They might have the customer teach them how to do their job, to share their stories. And they take this information back and then again go through this process. Are we asking the right question? And then continue with their development process rather. And sometimes that's just straight going into Agile, or sometimes they actually get integrated together.
Thank you. Another question. You talked about interdisciplinary teams.
Mm-hmm.
Can you speak a little bit more about the roles that are involved in a typical design thinking lab or session?
Yeah, I'll give you kind of an example of something very interesting that happened for us recently. So a lot of times when market research is done, it's done by the marketing team, and it's also very often done by phone call interviews or surveys. And I'm not saying these are ineffective, but I think actually being in the field with the customer is much more powerful, no matter what sector you're in. So we were working with a client in the healthcare space recently who followed this kind of more traditional approach. And ultimately, our recommendation was that they send their R&D folks to the field, because they're the ones that really need to understand how this healthcare product could change, how it should change. Now, interestingly, this product was for an emerging market. So a few things emerged from this. First of all, the marketing insights were very different from the R&D insights. The engineer came back with a list of observations that were so unique and so powerful that we were so pleased that they were actually able to go. Interestingly, because we were still going through this idea of, it is a culture shift. It takes time. We want to help people to go with kind of this open mindset and not make assumptions. The engineer came back, and the observations were interesting, but there was a lot of prefacing with, they did this wrong, and they did this wrong. And what we ultimately did is we flipped that to, there's a reason it's being done this way. How can we create a product to assist the way that it's currently being done? And also understanding, why is it being done that way? Is it a lack of knowledge? Is it because of expense? So, excuse me, for that reason, having engineers in the field became very, very powerful. Similarly, we've had folks in the room who talk about supply and observe things like, when we were in the market, we observed that the trucks that deliver this product X from one place to another in this market are much, much smaller. We're going to have to change the packaging of our product. So if we only have the marketing team in the room making these assessments, it's just not as valuable as having this kind of broad swath of observations and perspectives.
Thanks so much, Simone. And I think that actually does it. Unless there are any additional questions, maybe perhaps we can give it just one moment. I think that's it for the questions. I'd like to encourage everyone to follow up with any additional questions. Sometimes as you just let this incubate a bit, you'll come up with other questions that you'd like to have us answer. Please do feel free to submit those, and we'll do our best to have Simone follow up directly with you. Again, thank you so much for attending today's webcast. You will receive a follow-up email with the webcast recording from our session today. And please, please be on the lookout for future Belatrix Innovation University sessions. Thank you so much again, and have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.